Well, that's about to end right now. I have a client that lives over by Flipper or Winter,
Oh, okay, yeah.
and she called me Wednesday and said, "Don't do it."
Yeah, don't even bother trying to get
Yeah.
over the bridge.
How long will it take?
She said it's not worth it. We'll talk on the phone.
Wow. Yeah. No, they had that boat, that ferry, but I've heard mixed reviews about that. Sometimes it's full.
Well, no, she's like, I keep saying Flipper. Is anyone here old enough to remember Flipper?
Uh-huh.
You are.
I watched it as a kid.
I'd like to say no.
Winter. What's
Winter,
the Clearwater?
Marina, yeah,
Marina.
or aquarium. Clearwater
You
Aquarium.
take a right there. And
Island
she's all the way in the
Estates?
back. Now, I was going down to Clearwater, and she called and said, "Don't come" last week because of all of the insanity.
I feel like I hear him coming.
Elevated. Now, the Fed added a paragraph about the U.S. banking system, saying it's sound and resilient, then adding that they believe that bank failures will likely result in tighter
25 bips.
for households and businesses. And
Oh,
Fed says the extent of those effects are uncertain still on the economy. Now, the Fed seems
kind of be interesting to see what they say. Just some of the extra comments on the version of the economy and.
Hi, Pedro. Nice to meet you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. I didn't look at the name tags before. Hey, Jim.
You're fine. One more night. Big day. Are you home?
You have the agenda and all that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order for the pension board, Firefighters Pension Board, March 22nd, 2 p.m. First order will be a Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item is a open forum. Let's see, Ann, did you have anything for open forum?
No, I'm good. You're all pieces.
First item on the agenda is approval of minutes dated November 29th.
Move to approve the minutes from, what was it?
November
29th.
November 29th?
I'll second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Next item is approving the excused absence for Kenny Cerrone from November 29th.
Motion to accept. Approve.
I'll second. Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Considering reappointment for board-appointed trustee Paula Saracki. Am I on the wrong one? Yes, I am. Ms. Saracki, would you like to continue?
Yes, I would like to continue.
You need the motion and all that stuff.
Yes, that's right.
I'll make a motion to reappoint Paula Saracki to the pension board meeting, or the Board of Trustees.
Second?
Any discussion, questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Does this need, should need to go to council,
As
the reappointment?
So, right, as a ministerial function, council should officially, I guess, bless the appointment
Okay.
At a subsequent meeting. I don't know how you guys typically do it, but that's exactly right.
Okay.
Hope the mayor approves me.
I hope so too.
Otherwise.
Can I sit in the back of the car if he says no?
Yeah, right.
Okay, next item is presentation of the quarterly investment report.
I guess you'd like for me to address this, which this might, it's first report in a while and might be the last report for a little while that looks good, so let's talk about it and enjoy it. So what you do have in your packets would be as of December 31st. I can just run over the dollars real quick. I started with 8.1 million for the quarter. You had 24,000 in contributions come in. Earnings increase of 482,000. Paid out just under 22,000 in distributions. Had 8,800 in expenses. So your ending balance was $8,599,168.81. And then, per usual, the next couple pages of that are just the accounting. Any questions about dollars themselves?
None.
Hearing none, okay. I don't know if I've got the same as you, but page 13, if you do want to look at the actual return. So obviously by the 480,000 increase, and as I already alluded to, really, really strong quarter. The fund was up 5.89%. So again, that's our first fiscal year quarter, so we're off to a really nice start. And all of that was actually in October and November, which were two fantastic months. December actually pulled back a little bit. So all of those returns and more were actually just made in October and November. I think we kind of had two major events going on that helped give us a little bit of a tailwind for the quarter. One, as everybody probably recalls, we had the big national elections. And kind of forget your political leanings for a moment. The one thing we got from that, which historically has always been a bit of a boost and liked by the investment world, is we got a split government. And the theory there is if you have a split government, then nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to get done. And so essentially you have fiscal and monetary policy set for the next 2 years, right, till we get to a new, which would be a presidential cycle that time, and then we'll see all the humps and bumps just from that. So that kind of helped, I think, give us a little bit of a boost. And probably more importantly at the time, there was pretty much broad consensus that we were getting towards the end of the Fed's tightening cycle, all of these not so fun interest rate hikes that we've been experiencing last year and now into this year, that was coming to an end, that maybe there'd be a 1/4 point hike in January, and then that would be the end of it. And in the best of all scenarios, maybe even by the end of 23, you might actually see a lessening. You might even have the Fed loosening it back up a little bit. That was kind of the best case scenario. Well, unfortunately, the only thing that really ended up playing out accurately was we got the 1/4 point rate hike in January. Since then, and this is where things kind of get a little wild, is we continue to have very good economic data, which turns out that's really bad as far as the Fed's concerned. January was actually a fantastic month again. It was a huge month. But then February, we were starting to continue to see really strong labor markets, really good consumer spending, which is interesting because consumer confidence isn't terribly high, but the spending is still there. And that just really is just too much good news for the Fed. And so they've kind of told us all along, or not told us all along. Well, they've said all along, we will continue to fight inflation. It's public enemy number one until we have it under control. And because we were getting that good news, the Fed was pretty much leading us to believe that the rate hikes were going to continue. And as I believe was just confirmed by one of our trustees just a few minutes ago, they did raise it again a 1/4 point this afternoon, which falls in line with what most people expected. I think the general consensus probably, without having heard everything that's gone today, we'll get at least 2 more 1/4 point hikes probably coming. And then we'll kind of see from there. But that's going to continue to provide a strong headwind to the market, it's going to most likely, they're not going to be bouncing back in a strong way. Now, again, we've got a great report from this December quarter, but I don't think it means we've rallied and we're out of it. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, with the Fed's continued fight against inflation and the continued rate hikes, it's almost seems impossible or inevitable that we won't end up in a recessionary environment, which of course is going to make market growth stagnant probably, or very slow growth at best, if not, again, some more down markets. Now, that said, hopefully last year being down 13%, hopefully that is the worst of it, and we're certainly not predicting that. But I don't think, we're just, you look at this report and enjoy it, I don't think it means we're off and running again and going back to high growth like we've been kind of really blessed to have, and had a really great run in the last 12 years up until last year. So it's good news, but it's cautionary good news in this report. So just also to let the board know, because the real hot topic, of course, over the last week or so has been the banking industry. Silicon Valley Bank was a big concern to everybody. We sent out a memo. Don't know if everybody had the chance to see it. If you didn't and want to get it, make sure you let me know. But we did put together, our consultants, of course, from day one was on top of this, talking with investment managers, kind of finding out what impacts that would all have towards your all's fund. I can say the good news is that we had no direct exposure in the debt or equity markets. So there's really no direct impacts whatsoever. Kind of the closest issue we've had is our real estate manager has a joint venture partnership where the other entity just did banking at SVP. They've since moved all of their accounts out, moved them into another bank. So we were pretty much unscathed from a direct standpoint. Now, how I don't believe the dust is settled, unfortunately, yet. We'll see. Fingers crossed, maybe it won't turn out to be anything other than a blip. But certainly we could have indirect impacts, meaning just as the market experienced some turmoil last week and things like that, those can still impact you. But directly speaking, we didn't have any negative impacts to the fund, which is very happy to report on that. So that's kind of a high-level overview. I'll stop there. And, of course, if you have any questions or want to talk about anything more specifically in depth, be happy to do that.
Any questions, comments? Thank you. Next item is presentation of the administrative budget report for December 31.
Okay, the administrative budget report for fiscal year '23 it's coming in just as expected for this point in time. The report presented is through December 31st, 2022. During this period, the first quarter, we had administration fees of about $4,800, and then we also had legal fees that we paid out just a little over $4,000, total $8,810. Again, this is basically in line with this point in time of the year. Any questions?
Thank you. Next item is the change in method of determining the actuarial value of assets.
Okay. Chuck Carr from Southern Actuarial Service is not able to be here with us today. He would normally go through the actuarial evaluation. And Jeremy has offered to assist with that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeremy.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I would say probably just having the valuation, the next item on the agenda, and this all just be part of the same conversation.
Ask, yeah.
So going into the val, it's probably better to just rip the Band-Aid off for those of you that, if everybody hasn't already seen and aware, we can start there, and then that will kind of give the understanding of why there's been a methodology change. So if you do, if you're trying to pull it up on the screen or look, page 1-1 in the valuation itself, the new minimum required contribution rate to the plan is 55.11%. In that particular page, that 1-1, just shows you the math of how you get to there. More importantly, or not more importantly, but just the following page after that, page 1-2, gives you a pie chart to kind of show you the changes from what it has been to the new upcoming contribution rate. And for the 21-22 plan year, the city's contribution was roughly 27%. Now, of that, the chapter money made up roughly 11.5% of that. Yeah, this chart right there will show you that. And then the city was on the hook for the other 15.5% that the chapter money didn't make up. With the new increase, the expected chapter money, now again, obviously that varies from year to year. We don't know exactly, but if it were to hold steady, about 12.25%, and then the rest of the city's part would end up being 42.82%. So the city is essentially going to has a 55.11 contribution rate, as we said. Now, all of that, unfortunately, can be contributed to the investment world from last year, right? The down 13+%. Unfortunately, the market just didn't give us anything but a bloodbath essentially last year, and this is the results of that. One of the kind of interesting things, and this is directly from Chuck, because when I started to see all these valuations come out, there was a what I found to be a very unique kind of an oddity that I was noticing. Essentially, the better a plan was funded, the better they were doing, the way bigger increase they saw in their minimum contribution rate as a result. The less well-funded a plan was, the less they would see increases. Now, this is all else being equal. And so that kind of left you scratching your head a little bit. I can see the looks. You go, wait a minute, that doesn't. And so he explained it, I thought, pretty well to me, which is essentially, let's say you have $900 of assets, but you have $1,000 in liability, right? So you owe $100, and of course you pay for that over time, right? You're essentially making mortgage payments. Now all of a sudden, let's say because the investments, you still only have $900. That's kind of the best case. We actually ended up with less in this case. But let's say you only have $900, but your liabilities increased to $1,100. Well, now you owe $200 of a shortfall liability, so you can double your contributions as a result. Whereas if somebody else started out had say $400 in liabilities, right? They only had $600 in assets, but but still had $1,000 in liabilities, and started out with $400 of payments that they had to make, but now they have $1,100. Well, they only added $100 to the $400, so the increase was actually lessened because they already owed so much more, essentially, right? So the better funded you are, the less you owed. Any sort of additional change to your liabilities, any increase is magnified because you actually owe so much less up front. Does that kind of make sense? Whereas if you already had a huge gap that you were funding for, then adding some extra to that is less impactful from a percentage standpoint. And so what that means is because you all were you're still over 100% funded, actually. I think you're at 100, even with all of this, page 1-6, you're still at 103% funded. And so because you were even that much higher last year, therefore, well-funded, very healthy plan, the funding percent, or the contribution percentage takes a bigger hit as a result. So it's kind of like I said, it's a head scratcher till it gets explained, and then you kind of go, oh, okay, makes a little more sense, hopefully, to everybody. Before I continue on to the assumption part, just any questions about that, or does that kind of make a little bit of sense, a lot of sense?
It does just still seem like we're being punished because we're well-funded.
Exactly, yeah, I can't disagree, but it's just how the math, how the math ends up working, yeah. No, we had another plan, I forget what they ended up this year, but they were 160+% funded last year. Their contribution percentage went up over 40% this year. So, you know, this is a plan that was, you know, pushing the limits of 200% of funding, and yet still took a huge, one of the biggest hits of any plan we saw this year.
Because even though we've got the money for all the accrued liability, they're counting everything that would be accrued if everybody made it to their retirement. Is that where they're getting that extra liability from?
I'm not 100% sure if I'm following your question.
So
I'm sorry.
you're saying we're 100% funded. So to me, I'm like, well, how do we owe more then?
Oh, that's actually a great question. It's a really good question, especially in this time period. So what 100%, so funding as it's presented in these valuations is only referencing how you stand as of this point in time. So as of September 30th, 2022, this plan is 103% funded based on accrued liabilities only. So if you stop the plan at that point, said we're going to pay out everybody what they've already earned, just an actuarial equivalent, we're going to pay lump sums at that point, you'd have 3 cents left over for every dollar you owe. That does not account for the expected, right, because we're not closing the plan, so we expect to accrue more liabilities as people continue to work and earn more benefits, and that's what we're funding for. So no, that's a really good point of, yeah, why we continue to put any money in, but because we still have to fund for the expected future liabilities that we're going to incur.
So this extra city contribution, where does it come from then? Just our budget, our city budget?
Yeah.
General fund.
You had already expected that when you guys did the budget, right?
Not that big of a jump.
Not that big.
Well, here now it gets into the assumption part of the conversation, the methodology change. This is actually the lesser of two evils. What Chuck did do, and it's up to the board whether or not they want to accept this. You all are actually in control of telling an actuary what methods and assumptions to use as long as they're legal. So he thought it was best to make this change. It's up to you all as a board to say, yes, we agree or not. But he added what he calls a smoothing or a phase-in technique. So what he's doing now, instead of recognizing all of the gains or losses in a given year, he's smoothing them out and averaging over a 5-year period. And he did that because this plan would have actually, as it was not being implemented. This plan, had he not put that into place, would have been over 50% extra and would have been somewhere in the vicinity of 75% contribution rate this year. So it's a tool he keeps in his kind of his hip pocket to use for a rainy day. We had a rainy day. And so that's why he implemented it in this valuation. Now, again, it's up to the board whether or not they think that's appropriate, bearing in mind the city's budget. If you were to disagree with that change, that's going to have a very sizable impact on the city. Obviously, it's going to have one anyway. The good news, and Chuck would absolutely want to convey this to you all as well, hopefully, in the next, maybe not this year, but over the next year or two, market recovers, we start to see positive years, that number can very quickly come right back down. And we would expect it to over time. It just, it was an unprecedentedly bad year last year, and this is the unfortunate kind of results you get out of it. But hopefully we can see those numbers drop. Maybe theoretically, they could drop just as fast. They could drop in 1 year too. Now, that means we'd have to make 20+% this year. Probably not likely, but over the next couple of years, the market settles, starts to grow again like we would assume it will. Then those numbers we would expect to come way back down. But for the next little period of time while that's happening, this is kind of what you get out of it.
So, my wife says I'm an ignorant man. Can you, on table 1D, which is I think a couple pages up, everything where it says old assumptions without amendment, old assumptions with amendment, new assumptions with amendment, every number is the same on these 3 pages. So I'm not understanding it.
I can't, so he always has this page in there. Oh, I'm sorry, actually, it's very easy, because he did not make any assumption changes. It's a methodology change, is all. So it doesn't, so this particular page, he's always got this page in there, even in years that no assumption changes are made. So that's why it's the same, because there were no assumption changes made.
For that time period behind us.
So prior to, or it's not, looking back to the prior valuation, there are no changes in this report from that prior report. Assumption changes. So an assumption is, when are people going to retire? How many disabilities do we assume will happen over the lifespan of the plan? What is our assumed rate of return on investments? Those are assumptions. This is a different classification. This is a methodology classification, and that's why it doesn't show on that page. There should, just so you can see the way the methodology change does look and works, table 2A or page 2-1 will show you the math where he's averaging out gains and losses over the prior 4 years now. So this will be the 5th year now, so he's going to do a 5-year smoothing.
And this lovely smoothie is getting us to the 50 some odd percent.
Versus 75
higher,
or so
yeah.
percent. Yeah. And that's why this is a very, very, very common practice. A lot of plans already have this implemented. The whole concept generally for why a plan would have this is to keep the city's budget on a more level playing field, because obviously the markets, as we all know, it's up and down. Even if you look out and you say, well, we're assuming 7% and we've hit 7% on average. Well, if you look at any given year, we probably never actually hit 7%, right? So by using smoothing, it's just helping that city for budgeting purposes, because it means the contribution rate shouldn't fluctuate as much from any one year or another. In the case that you all weren't using is because it wasn't really needed, because the contribution rate was low enough that it wasn't causing any issues. And so therefore you keep it as a tool for a moment like this in time. So he's now utilizing that, but that's going forward. This will stay. The board could say, hey, we don't want to use it anymore, but what the state probably would not do is allow you to just jump back and forth, use this method 1 year, 2 years, change, come back to it if you're changing it on a regular basis, odds are the state's not going to approve this report when it's provided to them. So you wouldn't want to do that. But that said, a handful of years, what have you, you want to make a one-time change back with the expectation that it would stay a while, you could do that. But for the time being, this change would be made with the intent that it now is a regular method of how he does this, and again, with the theory being it's going to help stabilize the city's contribution from 1 year to the next for budgeting, planning purposes.
But it has not been used as of yet. He's recommending it for 22, 23.
Correct, to keep that minimum required contribution from skyrocketing even more than it already is going to.
And then his numbers are that he's coming up with, we're going to average a 7.22 going forward over the next 5 years, is what he's basing this on?
No, well, we're assuming we changed our assumption rate last year, so in the prior valuation, not this valuation, but the prior year's valuation, to 6.75%.
Correct, but I'm looking at table 2C,
Okay.
where he does the adjustments, and then it comes out to right there.
That's just an average. So over time, that number is going to change automatically, because now we're going to plug in 6.75 and drop off one of the 7.5.
So what's the number that he's using for this smoothie?
What was that table prior you were looking at?
Yeah, it's not that he's using a number, he's just saying, so what he's doing is he's now going back to 2018 and 19, and he's saying any gains or losses from that year, we're going to take 20% of those and use 20% of those gains or losses from that year as part of his determining of what the assets are. 19 and 20, he's going to say, okay, 40% of the gains or losses in that year we're going to recognize. And what he's doing is, so, and maybe this will help, to to show the impact of that. If you look about halfway down there, you see actuarial value of assets as October 1, 2022 is just under 8.3 million. Well, the actual market value was just under 7.5 million if you look just a few lines up from there. So what this does, it actually gives the plan an actuarial value that is greater than its market value, which means now the liabilities that we have to fund for, we've closed that gap, so we have to put less money in this year. Over a long period of time, the actuarial value typically in a healthy plan will be less than the market value. But in these cases where you come off of a historically bad year like we had, I mean, this is really a one-off scenario that we're talking about if you look back historically. You end up actually with a higher historical value or a higher actuarial value, which is what allows that contribution rate to be kept lower than it otherwise would be. Because now the gap between what it's saying, what he's showing our assets to be versus what our liabilities are, so that unfunded part, that gap's closed, so we don't have to put as much in. Whereas if he had to work off that 7.5 million instead of the 8.3 million, the gap's even bigger. The minimum required contribution this coming year is going to be that much greater for the city.
So what is the actual contribution that the city has to make this year at this 50?
It's 55.11%, and going back to that very first table, it's based on what we presume payroll will be. And so the number he was given that his expected payroll is 648,000. So the preliminary employer contribution for the year would be 357,000.
Well, that's painful to the budget.
So that's roughly double-ish from last year. So I assume the city put in 100, somewhere in the 175 range last year or something like that, maybe. Without.
I'm going to donate my board member salary.
So nice of you, thank you.
Yeah, the chapter 175 contribution that we get from the state, that does come off the 55%. So
Correct.
it's a little bit lower than that, but in the end.
And that was been roughly, looks like the last few years, give or take, it's been in that $50,000 range. Is that what I saw?
70.
Oh, is it? Okay, sorry. So you'll be able to deduct that from the city's contribution. And then the city does have, now it's not a big one, but it's good to just note, there's an advanced employer contribution, or an advanced employer contribution and actually, I'll back down to that, the page we were on for a little bit, 2-1. No, that's okay. So you see there's a advanced employer contribution of $44,901. What that is that's a credit the city has with the plan. It's kind of like a rainy day fund. So the city could choose, if they so wanted, to utilize some or all of that this year to help offset their costs as well. So in other words, if the city was like, yes, we want to take advantage of all that, they would just put 44, whatever that minimum required is, minus 44,901. When Chuck goes to do the valuation next year, he sees that there's a shortfall of 44,901, then he'll just deduct it automatically from that advanced employer contribution. So that's there as well too. So we always recommend when cities have the capability to always carry any sort of extra advanced employer contribution exactly for an event like this to help offset an unplanned budget crunch.
And can this 357 number, plus or minus the little change, can that be spread out this fiscal and next fiscal, or is this all something that has to be hit this year by September 30?
Would have to be made this year.
Wow.
Yeah, that gets into state statute where, Pedro, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the city does not meet their minimum required contribution rate, then the state can start withholding other funds, and that would get probably much more painful than even the 150,000, 300,000, whatever here.
Jeremy, since this is, the valuation report looks at it with a long-term perspective, we were kind of surprised to see one bad year take such a toll on the contribution rate.
Right. Well, again, it goes back to two things. One, it's historically bad. I mean, even '08 and '09 actually weren't this bad. A little bit of that being it was kind of spread out over 2 different fiscal years, some of that pain that was experienced during that time frame, whereas we took we took the brunt of it all in 3 quarters, because as we just saw, the October through December was great. So all of just, and we actually made almost 5% actually at the December 31st quarter of last year, so 4.5+%. So with a 4.5+% head start for the fiscal year, from January 1st to September 30th, we gave back then another 17, 18%. So it was just an historically bad 3 quarters that, we hopefully won't see again. Combined again with the fact going into that math equation where you have a well-funded plan that takes a bigger hit than a less funded. A plan that's 80% funded would, all else being equal, would have actually taken a smaller increase than this plan, because they already had a bigger liability. So.
Did you see contribution rates like this throughout the other plans?
Yeah, no, as I've mentioned, we've seen, I mean, and I wouldn't be able to break down the specific, I mean, we've seen some plans that didn't have any increases, but they had some other things going on, maybe weren't as well funded, some things along those lines, but then we've seen, like I mentioned, one of the best plans we work with, well funded, saw a bigger increase than you all did. So it's been a weird, wild ride with these valuations. But for the most part, yes, we've seen large increases.
I have a question on table 2C. We're just talking about investment returns.
Okay.
The market value versus the actuarial value. So most of the years are relatively even, except for this last year. There's a big difference there. Why does that show such a big difference?
Because that's experiencing the, let me go back to that other page real quick. Let's see. So if you go back to 2.1 or 2-1 again at the top, because 80% of that one is being recognized. 60% of the prior year, 40% of the prior 20. So we are absorbing the bulk of it still. Next year, only 60% of that lot. So those numbers are gonna. That's why it looks so different there. Again, just being implemented, this methodology change as well.
Okay.
But again, if we, if you decide not to adopt that change to add the smoothing, that minimum required is just going to go up that much more. I think, well, actually, we can tell you.
First page, yeah.
Let's see. Page 1-4. There's a 27.5% decrease due to this methodology change. So it would actually be just shy, it'd be what, 80.72% would be the minimum required contribution if you all do not adopt this. So again, that would be page 1-4 will show you kind of a breakdown. It's a few more pages from there.
Up or down?
Down, the way you're going. Perfect. Oh, nope, that was it right there. Yep. So you can see the prior year, 26.12%. There was a 51.5% increase due to the investments. You did have an extra 3.18% due to demographic experience. That's kind of a catch-all. So in other words, maybe raises were greater than expected, or you had, if you have a disability case, a new person who goes on disability, some sort of unfavorable experience to the plan gets categorized in there. So you had a 55.5% increase, but then because the methodology changed, that brings it back down 27.5%. So, and again, otherwise, if you don't make the change, you'd be at 80%, just over 80% on your minimum required contribution. So that would be roughly another, 175,000 or so that would be added to the required contribution this year. So I'd go up over $500,000.
Any other questions?
So you said 357,000 is what the city has to contribute this year? So what was it last year?
Last year. I think it,
Hey, what was the number last year?
I think you said it was about 175 or 178.
That should be in there.
is it 2E?
It should be on that very first page, right?
Is that good?
Yeah.
Would it be that 175, 914?
Okay.
No, that's the employees
Employee
of
contributions.
what they would give over their
If you go to table
lifespan as an
2E,
employee.
it gives a breakdown.
Okay. I saw it in there.
Yeah, so 119,000 plus chapter money made up 79. So it was supposed to be give or take 200,000. But the city only had to end up paying 119 because the chapter money made up almost 80 of it.
And this 357 does not include the chapter money? or-
Correct. So ideally, if we get another 80 that brings it to 270. If the city wanted to use all of their advanced employer, that could bring it down another 44. So the city could be somewhere in the 225, 230 range, potentially.
So do we actually have a choice?
You do, on the methodology part? Yeah, it's entirely up to the board, actually.
It's one or the other.
I'm sorry?
It's one or the other, right?
That's right.
Meaning use it or don't use the smoothing,
They
right?
can use the alternate method, or,
They can use the smoothing as it's presented here, or they
not.
could say, no, we don't want to, and he could redo the report to reflect that. But we do know what that results of that would look like.
And are we allowed to ask, does the city have an opinion?
well, would you rather go with the lower amount? I think we budgeted 35%. Because, it was lower last year. So we anticipated an increase, but not that much. So we will have to do a council budget revision to adjust our finances.
And if we didn't drop it to 6 3/4, it would have been really bad.
It would have been worse.
Yes. In this report, the answer is yes. I don't know if you want to go down that rabbit hole or not. Okay. There's some, you could really talk to minutia, and you could say, well, it might look better in this moment, but over time, but that's going down the rabbit holes.
So the city budgeted an additional 35 above the 119, correct? Based on what you paid in last year?
We budgeted a contribution rate of 35%.
Okay.
Now we're gonna have to raise it to 55. We will be
Right.
using that 40,000.
The 44, okay.
Right.
But still, it's double, basically, the city contribution is gonna be almost double what it was last year.
But we're 20% above what you had budgeted.
Correct.
So maybe 18 after you take out the 40 change.
Yeah, it's gonna be a hit.
Any other questions?
I move to accept a smoothie.
Not a smoothie.
I
Well, if you-
prefer
so-
cherry.
If you accept the report as presented, then by default, you accept the smoothie, so you wouldn't necessarily have to make
A motion, a separate motion.
And Jeremy, there's nothing else, there's no other methodology change?
no other
nothing else that you can
methodologies or
do?
assumption changes. Oh, anything else to do to assist with the,
With the contribution?
there's nothing that I'm aware of or have heard any actuaries state that would be an extra. I mean, I can't say that there's not, I wouldn't personally be aware of them.
If we increase the amortization schedule, wouldn't that help?
Depending on where he's at now, yes, theoretically that would help. I will tell you that the actuary would probably tell you, highly recommend you don't unless you had to. He would say if the city has to, because otherwise they're in dire straits, then maybe, but I do know enough about that. He would strongly recommend you don't unless you had to. But yes, that certainly could be depending on what he's using right now. Assuming he's not using a too long of a term now.
Didn't you start a motion over there?
Yeah, I move to accept it as presented.
The report,
Yeah.
I'll second it. Any other discussion or questions? All in favor of aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
I think in favor is like a bad way of saying it.
That's why I'm glad you did it.
With regret, with remorse.
So then the next item is approving the FMPTF invoice for the actuarial evaluation report.
I'm voting no after that.
It's not a good report, you do it for free.
Move to approve payment.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next is ratifying the member dues payment for.
Chairman,
FMPTF.
if we can, we do need to check one more box going back to the actuarial report.
Oh, okay.
There is, I'm sorry?
The interest rate assumption?
The expected rate of return, yeah, I can, so just as a quick refresher, this is a new item we've had to do for a few years now. So as we discussed, the actuary is using 6.75% as your assumed rate of return or expected rate of return on your assets or your investments. The state, so even though you just approved a valuation that says that's what you're expecting, the state decided they'd like for you to make a separate motion, and I can give you the motion and somebody can so move it unless you have conversations or questions. But usually that number will match what's in the valuation, because otherwise when you send that to the state and you're saying, well, we expect to make this, but we approved this in a report, then they're gonna raise their eyebrow and go, huh? So generally it's just that matching number of 6.75%. So if somebody was so inclined, it would be that your expected rate of return is 6.75% for the next year, the next several years, and the long term thereafter.
And was there a letter, because what's attached here looks like the CAFR report?
Is that the GASB 68 report?
So, yeah, when I clicked on the interest rate assumption, that's what came up.
That's for GASB 68.
Yeah.
But this says 7%?
So, no, I think this is
It's
the
different.
disclosure that's required by 112. So they have, they amended the statutes, I guess, maybe 5 years ago or so. And we have to provide these figures now, every year. So your actuary provides that, and then in theory, we're supposed to be posting that on the website and all that.
And it's it's 7%, is that,
So if you're looking at GASB, you probably just ignore that. Because GASB report, I probably is at 7, but that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. This particular item is just, in my opinion, certainly Pedro, if you have different, it's kind of just busy work. It's just, you got to check the boxes and exercise. I don't think it's terribly impactful unless, again, you were to tell the state, we expect one thing, but we used a different number in the valuation, because that would just be odd.
who sends the letter to the state? The actuary?
This particular, so I know the actuary files the report with states. They have 60 days to do that after the board accepts it, and they do that generally within a few days. I'm not 100% sure who historically has done that letter. I don't know if you all have or if the actuary has.
Okay, I think they have.
I'm not sure. Okay.
It's actually, it's an email now that you can send them. And so I don't know, I thought it was usually the consultant would usually send that, but the financial consultant, but it doesn't have to, it could be whomever.
The expected rate of return one?
Well, and I guess that's what I'm asking, because I'm looking for the letter, I guess.
It has it here. 675 is what the plan assumed for this valuation report.
Okay. It's just in the agenda that was,
Right. No,
but that brings up that gas fee thing. So it's not a separate letter, it's just, we're just reaffirming that.
No, it's a separate letter.
it's a separate letter. It's an additional disclosure that's required. So in separate and apart from the valuation report, we have to advise or publish essentially to not only the state, but in theory, the public, that we anticipate that for this year, the next several years, and the long term thereafter, we believe we're gonna make the 6.75% return. And so what Jeremy is saying is, even though we already do that as part of the valuation report, you're not necessarily required to match the two numbers, but if you don't, then you're gonna get a question from the state saying, well, why do you think you're gonna make X, but you're funding at Y? Why is there a difference? And so if we have a good explanation, we would just have to address that. But it's usually just easier to match. And then, if you're gonna, so for example, some of our plans have a different rate of return because they've already taken the action saying, okay, this report, we're gonna have this, but then next year, we're gonna lower it by 0.25%. And then the following year, we're gonna lower it by another 0.25%. So they say we're anticipating, whatever it's gonna be 2 years from now, let's say. So we would just have to articulate that to the state. But since we don't really have that plan right now, it would just make sense to approve the same rate that we are using for funding purposes.
You said you had a way to word that we could,
Oh, yeah, that was it. Just that your expected rate of return would be 6.75% for the next year, the next several years, and the long term thereafter.
I move what he said.
Yep. I'll second.
any other discussion, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Jeremy.
That's under Robert rules, Ann.
Okay, so next item is ratifying the dues payment for FPPTA.
Okay, attached in the packet is an invoice from the FPPTA for the annual dues. We did have this budgeted for $1,000, so this comes in under budget. And we went ahead and paid that in January because we did, so it wasn't late. And actually it was late, it was due in December, but we paid it in January in any case. So we are presenting it to the board to be ratified.
Okay. I make a motion to approve payment, or to ratify the payment.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next item is discuss the RFP for the board attorney.
At the last meeting, the board discussed the potential for an RFP for legal services. And Pedro, you mentioned that you might be able to do something to present an option to the board for a different or lower fee.
Yes. So I think at the last meeting, I had suggested, just based on kind of where the plan is and what the expected workload, I guess, so to speak, would be going forward, that we would be happy to reduce the fee by 20%. And if, if that's agreeable to you guys, I have no qualms about it at all, and would certainly, love to continue working with you guys. And I mean, I've never lost a client because of fees, so I definitely don't want to now, but obviously I understand.
I would go ahead and make a motion to accept the reduction in fees.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Any questions or discussion?
Will you prepare a new agreement for
Sure.
us? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Of
To
course.
document that?
Yep.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Welcome back aboard.
I was hanging by a little bit.
No, we appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the next item is considering administrative services agreement with the FMPTF.
Okay, speaking of workload, the Administrative Services Department currently prepares the agenda for the meetings. We monitor the statutory requirements and keep an eye on everything and make sure that all the requirements have been met and all the reports have been filed. It currently takes 3 people from our staff to prepare the agenda and just to try and keep up with everything. And then the city clerk's time as well, and Kristen now, to record the minutes. We also have to have our IT staff to do the live streaming of the meeting. So it's pretty substantial effort on our part. And then as you can tell from the way the meeting transpires, Jeremy has a significant level of expertise in this area that we don't necessarily have. He does this for a lot of different plans. The FMPTF would, for a fee, they would take this over from the city, and they would basically make sure everything has been on the agenda. They would make sure the reports are ordered. Jeremy, you can correct me if I missed something.
Okay.
You can take it.
Sure, yeah, no, sure, and I'd rather, and I always like to err on the under promise, over deliver than vice versa. So for full clarification, just kind of going back to some of the things you mentioned, what we can do is we can take over 90+% of the workload that the city's having to do, putting together agendas, communicating with trustees, making sure that we do check all our boxes each quarter. Of course, you've retained strong legal services as well, as of a few moments ago, who's going to help you to make sure those boxes are checked. But we certainly do have the expertise and knowledge to assist with all that. So we'll be preparing the agendas to make sure everything's done in a timely manner. We'll record the meeting, provide the minutes, so on and so forth. Where I do want to not overpromise is, depending upon the needs, requirements of the city / the board, I don't have the ability to live stream the meeting or things along those lines. So certainly I'll bring a recorder. And we do all the record keeping. So we'll keep all the records. We'll keep copies of the minutes. Of course, we'll provide the audio. So I'll take the audio recordings, and we'll certainly provide that to the city if they want it additionally, although if they're going to continue to do that, they may have their own copy. So we can pretty much do everything else. Occasionally, we're still going to need the city if you have, at the end of the year, we have to make sure all of our numbers are correct from payroll. So there's a couple items still, but as far as it just relates to having board meetings, making sure everything's taken care of, we could take that responsibility from them. It's hopefully it's a nominal fee in your all's mind. It's $750 a quarter, so $3,000 a year. To add that, and then hopefully you all are all aware of, presumably it would be Stephanie Forbes, who's kind of doing the day-to-day behind the scenes administrative part of your plan. If you all decide that full service makes sense, you'd like to do that, she may continue on, or we may use somebody else who's got a little more extra free time, because it does require some extra work. And then the other part is, of course, I am therefore here every meeting. Hopefully that's a positive. But as a result, we'll make sure everybody's schedules line up. So I'll be here at every meeting to answer questions and do everything that we've just discussed. So.
Okay. Yeah, we would still live stream the meeting because all of our meetings in here are live streamed. But our IT staff could take care of that. We would still be here, this finance staff. And it's not that we don't love you guys, but
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. So,
And to free you guys up for $3,000 a year, I think it's absolutely a no-brainer.
Reasonable, yeah.
Just because I'm an annoying stickler. Is that coming out of city budget or the plan?
come out of the plan.
We get it free now. And around, I'm being smart.
We can still do the accounting and everything. We'll do the behind the things, but they'll just make sure we stay out of trouble.
Okay. I mean, I will say, at the end of the day, the city's picking up the bill anyway, so.
That's true.
Whether we pay it now and then they pay it back.
We just had a big
to us.
discussion about that.
Yeah, they're gonna pay it back to us after the fact, so.
Just
When they
say-
give us that 55.1% of payroll.
Well, now we're up to a net 21, unexpected.
Well, we just save some money on the legal fees.
There you go.
I would make a motion to accept the FMPTF's proposal for taking over the administrative duties as proposed.
Second.
Any other discussion, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
So I think, Jeremy, in the past, you guys have a pretty simple engagement letter that
We
you
do.
send. So,
Is that this one here?
That's all you have, right, Jeremy?
It's just,
Yep. that's it.
it's quite simple.
How many cities do you do the plan for? Or do you do this?
Do this full, so we have, give or take, we have about 55 plans we work with around the state. 32-ish, I think, or how many I go to. 32, 33, somewhere, right around there. So
Jeremy,
honestly, I'm actually hoping you all might be the last. So I'm on the road a lot, so
Did we add some things to this one just to cover there's some statutory provisions that we have to have as part of our provider agreements. We'll look at it. We'll work on it.
yeah, certainly, I mean, within reason, which I assume it'll be reasonable, yeah, we're happy to make reasonable amendments to an agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not meant to be, it's meant to be simple, it's not meant to be all encompassing. So if you're looking on there and saying, hey, we'd really like it if you all did X as well, assuming it's not something that is labor intensive and creates a lot more work, then that would just be part of it. We're not charging you for faxes and, paper or anything like that. So it would only be if you asked us to do a big project or said, hey, we really need this thing else and it's gonna add hours and hours of work, which hasn't happened with any other board, so I don't expect it to. But outside of that, just kind of everyday stuff that's intended to be all encompassing of, so.
So are we losing the whole staff for the meetings?
No, they'll still be here.
We'll be here.
I'll still be here. Garrett's out.
I might sit down there, though.
I do want, there is one, even though you did agree, there is really one huge caveat though, and hopefully the board would be amenable to this, is just to make sure we can work with my scheduling. And I actually have not looked, would you all want this to go into effect starting next meeting ideally? Because we probably need to look at dates and make sure that I haven't even looked
I
at.
would think ideally, but yeah, we can,
Is that something we want to look at now, or just send out some emails if I've got any conflicts over the next?
It's June 9th.
June 8th, it says on our agenda.
8th or 9th?
It says here, June 8th.
June 8th.
June 8th. I was close.
Right month?
So if it is June 8th,
Oh,
then
yes, Ann.
I
Pick
can-
me, pick me.
I can already tell you, unfortunately, that would not, I could not make June 8th.
Renee.
what's that? Please. Yes, please.
Ann Nixon. City Clerk, I love you all. I would like to say, for Kristen's benefit, that scheduling the meetings is a pain in the patootie. So if you could take over that duty as part of this, that would be absolutely excellent. I think it'll be much easier now that you're you know, that we have a little bit, between the firefighters scheduling and the attorney scheduling, it's a pain in the patootie. So if you would do that, that would be absolutely incredible, and then you would definitely be going with your schedule.
So what I can say is, I already expected to do that. So absolutely, we will take over scheduling. So communications and working on scheduling would come through us. So that is no problem at all. So then, yeah, unfortunately, June 8th, either if you need to keep that date, we might have to kick it a quarter, or if you all would be willing to look at a different date. Unfortunately, I will be down in the Miami area, so that could be a little difficult.
I think you two are the biggest factors, so.
So that was actually one thing I was gonna ask, and we talked about it at the last meeting, but I didn't say it at this meeting, so I just wanted to, so I was gonna reduce it effective 4/1 with the next retainer. April 1 would be the next reduction.
Okay.
I didn't say that, but hopefully that's okay. We'll make it effective as of the, next week, I guess, or whatever it is. And then the second thing is, I know we talked about it before, and it's up to you guys. It's easier for me to fit in meetings if I can attend remotely. But I know that I enjoy being welcome, so I'm happy to be here as well. It's just a little bit more challenging to coordinate the schedule. But, so if you guys are okay with me attending 1 or 2 meetings remotely, then, I could work with Jeremy on the dates. But I just wanted to put that out there, because I know we talked about it 2 meetings ago, but we didn't talk about it now, so, I didn't want any
Yeah.
surprises or anything like
I
that.
thought that part of the
That's what I thought too.
Was that you were gonna
Was
be
that
doing
you were going,
remotely.
that was my assumption, was that you were going to do it.
It is, I mean, that
Okay.
was my assumption
Yeah.
too, but I didn't want it to be my assumption, so I
No,
just wanted to make
I
sure
thought
that
that.
I'm all
yeah.
for saving
that
gas.
we spoke about it, and I didn't, I just didn't I wanted to avoid anything, well, he didn't tell us that, and so,
I want you on that thing that they have.
Owl.
the owl.
Is it the owl? There's that one that rolls around and it's the little laptop face and you're just going with it.
Oh, no, I don't know about.
I don't know if you
we
want
have
that
owls.
much, yeah, I don't know if
We
you
have
want that
owls.
much Pedro, but,
You can never have too much
my
patience.
wife doesn't want that much Pedro, so it's all right. I understand. Only my dog likes me that much, I think. Maybe my kids.
So I guess then up.
So we'll work
entirely
on
up
the
to board.
dates for the next, I think what I'm hearing is, you'd like to see if we can find another date other than June 9th, right? To have Jeremy come on board, or do you want to keep the June 9th meeting and I'm sorry, the 8th, I know.
I'm flexible.
I was fed bad information.
I know
so-
you were.
so, okay.
Consider this horse.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, the board, we can pick a date now, keep the date, start the next one, or we can just work through email communication to find a date, whatever the board's pleasure.
I'm okay working through email.
Okay.
Okay.
And then I guess, just so we are doing what you all want, days of the week, times, the importance of that, not important, very important. Don't do certain days, has to be this day. What are my parameters as we start communicating?
So, yeah, for us, we just don't want to do it on Kenny's shift. So that would be the only parameter for us.
Every third day?
Yeah, and I'll get you a calendar.
Okay, perfect, that would help.
And if you could avoid Mondays at 4 o'clock, then that'll steer you
You're
clear.
gonna be retired, what do you
Yeah,
care?
well, the Veterans Board will meet here occasionally on Mondays at 4 o'clock, so that means you wouldn't have any board conflicts.
No problem.
And then the code enforcement on other days. I know, we haven't met in like, I don't know how many months.
Code enforcement's normally on Thursdays? Yes,
First
if you
Thursday.
avoid Mondays and Thursdays?
All
at
days
4,
that end in Y.
There you go.
What's today, Wednesday, okay. So Tuesday and Wednesdays are most ideal, if possible.
Later or earlier, it's right in the middle of the day, it's a killer.
It is-
Later or earlier?
I said either morning or afternoon, this right in the middle of the day kind of just like disrupts, but it's up to y'all.
As long as it's not at 6 o'clock and interfering with yoga.
If
and
it's
stuff
6,
like
I'm tearing up that agreement.
And I'm resigning.
6 AM, I'm still looking at these.
Somehow the mayor's gonna disapprove. I mean, the whole board's gonna go. We're gonna bring back Ann.
You could Zoom from Tennessee.
She's using a burner phone. She's tossing the other one.
So Tuesday, Wednesday mornings, after, what, let's talk time then. What?
Doesn't matter to me.
I'm good with any time, so it's up to you guys on your schedules.
I'm pretty open.
Yeah, mornings are better for me because I gotta go pick up the little man.
What's a morning look like? 9?
Nine's good?
Fine.
9, so we'll shoot for 9s, hopefully on a Tuesday or Wednesday.
Wednesday?
Yeah,
Okay.
then we'll check the schedule for the room as well.
Or you
Okay.
guys
Make sure it's open.
I'm sorry?
Then you've got, you have a rush hour getting here, though.
I honestly, if we meet at 9, which is totally fine, I will probably come over the night before.
Oh.
Yeah, because, yes, it'll be a nightmare trying to get here otherwise, so.
Right.
Yes, Ann?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Just wanted to get some extra steps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So attorney update.
Okay, so I will try to keep my comments as brief as possible. Just two things really I wanted to go over with you. First, I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at a special report that we prepared regarding the Secure Act 2.0. It's as exciting as it sounds. So essentially, if you guys recall, going back in 2019, the first iteration of the Secure Act was passed by Congress, signed by the president. And effectively what it did was it increased the required minimum distribution age for qualified plans. So from age 70 and a half to age 72. And essentially, as a qualified plan, right, these retirement accounts, they're essentially tax deferral mechanisms, right? So you take salary, you put it away in this retirement account, and there's a qualified plan. You don't have to pay taxes on that money as your salary, with the thought being at some point down the line, when you take the money out, you take a distribution, Uncle Sam gets his cut and you get your money, right? That line in the sand originally was age 70 and a half. The setting every community up for retirement enhancement, the whole purpose of it was, just demographics. People are working longer, people are living longer. Fortunately or unfortunately, cost of living continues to increase, and so people are generally working later into their lives. And so the thought was to allow folks to be able to shield some more money from income tax and maybe put some more away for retirement. So that happened back in 2019. This recently, December 29th of this last calendar year, signed again, Secure Act 2.0. Congress is not very creative with its naming. And essentially, again, it increased the required minimum distribution age from age 72 to age 73. And then by 2030, it will increase again to age 75. Now, for purposes of our plan, administratively, practically speaking, this doesn't really play any kind of a role because, as you guys are aware, obviously, our members retire much sooner than that, and they begin taking distributions well before they hit that age. So practically, administratively, fiscally, from an actuarial standpoint, it's not going to impact the plan because, again, we're already anticipating we're going to make these payments out to the individuals well before at their normal retirement age, which is, 15 years, 16 years, 18 years, potentially before this required RMD age. However, obviously, in your other lives, if you have another qualified account, if you, 457 plan, for example, deferred comp with the city, 401k, an IRA, something like that, this would obviously come into play on that realm, and so it may be something that you want to talk about with your financial planner, your tax planner, whomever it may be. There's also a couple of other changes for first responders that I think are beneficial and kind of address a little bit of a disconnect really between the way plans were run and what the Internal Revenue Code provided for. First and foremost, right now, under another bill, there's a provision that allows for first responders to use up to $3,000 of their pension tax-free, provided it is applied towards paying for health insurance, right? So historically, however, the only caveat was that the pension fund needed to make the payment directly to the insurance carrier. In other words, the individual couldn't realize that money, wouldn't receive that money technically. The pension fund would make that $3,000 payment or you know, whatever it was, up to $3,000 to United Healthcare, to whomever it may be, and then on the 1099-R that the retiree receives every year, it would just be $3,000 less, right? The total income would be $3,000 less, and so therefore you have that lower taxable amount. This addresses that and now allows for the individual to make the payment directly rather than having it solely come from the pension fund. And again, here it may not have been a problem, but what was happening in other places where potentially it was the plan sponsor that was making the pension payments, they would generally only provide this service to its retirees if the individual stayed on the city's plan or on the sponsoring agency's plan, really just for administrative ease, right? It was, and you know, ultimately lack of taking on more liability, right? Because it was easy to just continue making payments to the same insurance company rather than potentially having to pay 3, 4, 5, 10 different insurance companies. You know, if a payment was missed, then the retiree could potentially be without insurance, and so most places didn't want to take on that extra liability, that extra administrative burden, and so what would end up happening was individuals, retirees, would end up staying on the city's plan, even though it was probably more economical. They could probably find cheaper or, you know, quote unquote, more affordable healthcare in the private marketplace. So this, I think, goes to address that, and hopefully will give some retirees some added flexibility and still taking advantage of the benefit, but, you know, potentially also finding more affordable healthcare. So they kind of get it on both sides.
And that's part of the Secure Act?
Correct. Also, another change for certain plans around the country, if you are receiving a line of duty or a service-connected disability benefit, that benefit is generally tax-free, at least, you know, to the point where there's a minimum benefit, so that portion of it would be tax-free. Some plans, once the member reaches normal retirement age as defined in the plan would automatically convert the benefit from a disability retirement to a normal form of benefit, right, to a normal retirement. And so what would happen on the tax side is now that individual, they're still disabled, but now they would lose the tax benefit, right, the favorable treatment of that disability retirement being non-taxable. And so now they were being taxed on this money, but really nothing has changed, right? They still remain disabled. So this goes to address that, and now it provides that even if the plan converts the benefit, from the IRS's perspective, it will still be seen, it will still receive the same favorable tax treatment or tax exemption. So again, doesn't affect this plan specifically, but just kind of goes towards addressing maybe a disconnect in the way plans were administered and the way the tax code would view them. And then just on that last page of the special report, I provided a couple of other provisions that are new with this Secure Act. Again, they don't affect this plan. It's really more on the defined contribution side. So if you guys want to impress your friends at parties, you can talk about it. But I thought it just might be helpful. You could use it as a resource with financial planners or tax accountants or anything like that. Okay. We will potentially need to amend the plan to comply with the new required minimum distribution age, the RMD age. We did it before when it changed back in 2019, so we're likely going to have to do it again. I don't know if you guys, is the FMPTF, are you guys going to have kind of an omnibus amendment or something?
I don't know if do they use our plan document? Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
They do.
They use it's, yes.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
automatically update
So
those when
we'll,
needed, so
you
that'll
know,
flow through.
They should be doing it, but, you know, just so you guys are aware that may be something that's coming. Again, it's not going to have any fiscal impact, actuarial impact on the plan, but just something that needs to be done to continue compliance with the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, any questions on that? No, all right. And then fast forward a little bit to Florida legislative session. It began, I guess, about 2 weeks ago now, a week and a half ago. There has been one bill filed, House Bill 3. I don't remember the Senate bill counterpart, but House Bill 3, it's been coined the Anti-Woke Act. But essentially, if you guys recall, last summer, there was a lot of news about some administrative policies that the State Board of Administration here in Florida changed, the SBA, which is administered by the governor and 2 appointees. One of them is the CFO, and I believe that the other is the CEO. But nonetheless, they made an administrative change to all SBA assets. Primarily, that's Florida Retirement System, FRS, but obviously there's other assets, unclaimed property, the 529 account, and other state funds, whereby investments were only to be permissible, allowed, if the determining factor was quote unquote pecuniary factors, right? And so what that means is that they could only make investment decisions based on price, fees, standard deviation, alpha, those kinds of metrics that are in those reports that we see on a quarterly basis, empirical data, right? That was the only factors that could be utilized when a fiduciary was making a decision. They made that decision at the board level. This law essentially codifies that, or would codify that, and it would apply to local pension funds, obviously such as ourselves. It applies to FRS. It applies to any state public fund. And so it would require, it actually goes towards amending the definition in Chapter 112 of a fiduciary to now include that fiduciaries will only look at these pecuniary factors when they're making these decisions. And so what that excludes, right, is those environmental, social, corporate governance, those ESG factors that I'm sure you guys have heard about and read about. Anything that takes into account something like that, right, something other than these pecuniary factors would be impermissible, would be actually a breach now, if this law passes, of your fiduciary responsibilities. And it also allows for, provides the Attorney General with actually prosecutorial powers or authority to criminally prosecute folks who may do something like this. So it not only applies to pension funds, it also applies to state agencies that issue bonds. So city, obviously, if it's going to issue a bond, anybody who's issuing a bond, any kind of taxing authority that would be issuing a bond, would need to follow the same pecuniary factors only, and they would not be able to look at anything else. So, for example, if there was a bond being issued for some sort of environmental purpose or some sort of governance, or I don't know, those would be essentially impermissible and not allowed. Similarly, qualified public depositories, so banks, trust companies, any institution that holds public assets here in Florida, they have to be designated by statute as a qualified public depository. They have to kind of meet certain requirements. And so this would be one of those requirements. So if you do house public funds, for those, you know, if you're a bank, those short-term investment, the STIF vehicle, or the sweep vehicle, anything else that the bank utilizes using public funds, similarly would have to follow these pecuniary factors only, exclusively, and nothing else. So it's pretty broad, it's pretty far-reaching. It would require, similarly, investment management agreements, which right now, you know, we don't really have individual manager agreements, but if at some point we did, it would require certain boilerplate language to be included, or disclaimers to be included in those investment management agreements. Similarly with proxy voting, again, we don't really have that here with our plan because we're part of the FMPTF, but if you know, in any kind of a separately managed account, typically as an equity holder, right? You're a shareholder, you own a piece of the company, so anytime there's some sort of corporate action that needs to take place, usually on an annual basis, they'll send out these elections, and you have to kind of vote that's usually designated or delegated rather to your investment manager. But if there's any kind of a proxy voting policy, then this would have to be incorporated as part of that. So, it's pretty extensive. It's pretty far reaching. My understanding is it does have bicameral support, so it is gonna pass. I'm sure you guys have seen it as well. The Florida legislature is pretty lockstep with what the governor's policies are, so, this is not expected to be any kind of impetus, and it is gonna pass, so we'll keep you posted, but, that's really it. There's a bill also, I guess, on the FRS side. I'll just quickly address it, just in case anybody's interested. They are proposing lowering the retirement age, normal retirement age for Florida retirement system, as well as increasing or providing a COLA again, and extending the drop from 5 years to 8 years. So, obviously keep you guys posted on that as well, but so far that's it. Those are the only bills that really have been introduced. I say that's it a little bit facetiously, but so far, that's it.
Any education stuff coming up?
So the FPPTA is gonna have its annual conference. I wanna say it's June 29th. I had those dates, I can look it up real quick. And then the Division of Retirement typically puts on a school in the spring. So they'll put one on in the fall, usually in Orlando. This year it got canceled because of it got canceled, then it was postponed to later in December. And then they'll typically hold one in springtime, usually. It's on FSU's campus up in Tallahassee, so they'll typically wait till spring semester ends. So it's usually May, early May, maybe mid-May. This year, however, when I was speaking to the folks at the DOR at their winter school over in December, they actually, the way that they were leaning, they may not be holding the spring school. They don't have the attendance, I think, is what they were saying, to justify having two schools. So they may just end up having one school per year. So there hasn't been anything announced yet for the May school, but there may be one. So as soon as I hear something, I'll send it along. But other than that, really, it would just be the FPPTA in the summertime. Okay.
Thank you. And before we adjourn, if you guys will indulge me, we would like to say thank you to Anne.
Yes.
She's retiring, for all the work she's done for us. And also introduce Kristen, our city clerk. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would. Kristen Garcia, the new city clerk here. It's my second week on the job, and very big shoes to coming into. And I was at City of Temple Terrace for the last almost 7 years as their deputy city clerk. So any questions you have for me, let me know.
All right. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, next meeting is June 8th, tentatively. Just need a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I'll second. All in favor?
So I have the dates. It's June 25 through the 28th at the Rosen Center in Orlando. Well, actually, it's the Rosen Shingle Creek, which I see here is not the Rosen Center, but I guess it's maybe on the same property or
No, Shingle Creek's different. It's actually a huge resort.
bigger.
It's a,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah,
very,
that's
very
where we
big.
have our insurance convention.
I
Every
thought the
Thursday.
Rosen Center was pretty big. I mean, it's.
I
pretty-
think Shingle Creek's bigger, I believe.
Well, okay. So
Either way, it's a large.
It's
large
that-
resort.
it's not at the Rosen Center. It's at the Rosen Shingle Creek, June 25 through 28.
That's where they have FGFOA last year and this year.
Oh, and Form 1s, right?
That's right.
All right, I think we're adjourned.
Yep,
Did we all say yes? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.